because to them, the more fear you have, the better you taste to them. There's a good reason why people close their curtains at night in the Appalachian Mountains. There are things in those woods that are terrifying. And one of those things happened to be the Appalachian wendigo. Now, there was this man named Jim. Jim decided one day that he was going to sell everything he had and buy some acreage of land in the Appalachian Mountains and start this homestead. So Jim finds this good piece of land and he moves there, builds a cabin and several structures. And for a year, his life was amazing. He said one day, though, he gets a knock on his cabin door. And he said he opens the door. On the other side of the door was this older gentleman. And he said the gentleman started speaking. He said, "Hey, my name is Fox. I live not too far from here. And I wanted to check on you because I know you're all alone out here. And things can happen to people who are alone in the woods." And Jim was kind of like, why is this guy saying all this and stuff? So he said the guy continued to talk to him, but all he could think about was the fact that this guy, Fox, looked exactly like his father, who had passed away when he was a young boy. And he said it was just very, very eerie. It was like talking to his father. So he said, finally, the guy said, "You be safe out here. I'll see you later." And he said the way he said it was kind of creepy. So he said this guy, Fox, he just walked away and took off into the woods, and he never seen him again. A couple months after this, he said, one night he was asleep in his bedroom, and he awakes to this sound of scratching. And he said the scratching sounds were coming from his window. And he said when he looked over in the direction towards his window, he sees the shadow appear, and it's almost in the shape of a person. And he said the shadow just moved across the wall, all the way around him to the other side of his bed. And he said the next thing he knows, something was holding him down. He could not move, and he was panicking and freaking out. And then he said, all of a sudden, it was gone. And he got up and he said, that must have just been a really crazy dream. So he said, this kept happening to him. He kept having this, what he thought at the time was a dream. Well, one day he said he was out on his land setting up some traps. And he said he happened to notice in the snow there was all of this weird movement. And he said, "What is that in the snow?" So he goes a little closer, he grabs a tree branch, and he moves the snow over. And he said out popped several rats. And he said that's when he realized these rats were eating a deer carcass. And he said it was just so sickening that he had to start vomiting. And he said as he was bent over vomiting into the snow, he looks up, and there is the guy, Fox. And he said the guy was just standing there staring at him. And he's like, "Hey, what are you doing out here on my property?" And he said Fox looked at him and said, "You seen the deer?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "You see, a lot of weird things happen in these woods." And then he said he turned and just walked away. So he said, that was like a really weird encounter. Like, did he have something to do with that deer or whatever? So he said, next couple of days, he really, really kept having these nightmares where he would see this shadowy thing in his room. And then he said this one particular night, he was sitting by the fireplace and he was just contemplating life. And he said all of a sudden, the next thing he knows, he just stood up. He started walking towards the door. He opened the front door of the cabin and he starts walking out into the woods. And he said it was weird. It was like he knew what he was doing, but he couldn't control it. And something was just drawing him into the woods deeper and deeper. So he said finally he stops and he's just surrounded by trees. It's completely dark. And he said the next thing he knows, he hears his father's voice say, "Son, come here, it's your father." And he said out of the shadows steps that guy, Fox, again. And he said, "It's me. I'm your father. Come here. Come give your father a hug. And Jim's just kind of like, no, you're not my father. My father's not here anymore. And he's like, no, I am your father. Like, I've been here the whole time. Come give me a hug. And he said he just like didn't trust this guy. He thought he was crazy. And he said all of a sudden, this guy's skin began to peel off. And he said that's when he could see this wasn't his father. This wasn't a man. This was this pale, white, skinny creature with sharp teeth, sharp claws, and these bright yellow eyes. And he said, this thing said to him, I said, come here now. And the voice had changed. So he said, next thing he knows, like he was able to get awareness again. And like he was aware of his situation where he was at. He turns and he just takes off running. He gets back to his cabin, he jumps in his truck, and he leaves his cabin and just abandons it. And he said after a couple of weeks, he didn't know what to do. So he went to this Native American man in town that everyone said was a medicine man. And he told him like what had happened and stuff. And he said, this Native American man said to him, what you seen was the wendigo, what my people call the wendigo. And he said, he has chosen you. And the reason he hasn't taken you yet is because he wants you to be as afraid as possible. Because to them, the more fear you have, the better you taste to them. And he will continue to follow you and, harass you until he finally gets you afraid enough that he will take you. So Jim said he decided to sell the cabin and he never went back there again. And he said still to this day, he can hear scratching sometimes at his window.